Okay.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and doing well. We are going to talk today about contract negotiations, extra duties, things that are required or not required of a stage manager. And we're going to talk about that from a non-union standpoint as well as a union standpoint. But I'm going to start off today with what equity says a stage manager does or does not do, because I think that is helpful to you if you're a non-union stage manager, so that you kind of have an idea of what you may be asked to do now and later can say, I don't have to do that, or I should get paid for that. So I did some research, and I'm using some of the stuff I'm using today is from LORT contracts, but I've also included some off-Broadway contract stuff as well. But since most people are coming from a regional standpoint, I wanted to focus mainly on LORT. Recognize that equity recognizes in their contracts that stage managers that is a full-time job, full-time position, and that stage managers should not function in other areas. Those other areas being, and this comes from the LORT contract, you are not required, stage managers and assistant stage managers are not required to perform the following unless they are contracted and compensated separately from the equity contract. And that separate written contract should be sent to equity as well, if that is the case. So stage managers and assistant stage managers are not required to do the following: design, build, hang, transport, operate, shift, run, shop for, or maintain lights, sound, scenery, props, video, wardrobe, animals, etc. That is the first one. That is important because in many cases, as a non-equity stage manager, you're probably going to be asked to run a light board or a soundboard, for example. If you are asked to do that as an equity stage manager, that is not part of your duties. That is considered an extra duty. And that would be something you would want to ask up front. If you ask me to run a light board, for example, let's talk extra compensation for that. Stage managers and assistant stage managers should not be arranging living accommodations, ordering or distributing food, being responsible for any aspect of transportation, being responsible for any aspect of laundry or dry cleaning. Laundry and dry cleaning sometimes can fall or be asked of an assistant stage manager. Again, that's a duty you should be paid extra for. You should not be responsible for setting up stage managerial tech tables for technical rehearsals. You should not be responsible for supervising other staff. You should also not be responsible for having contracts or riders signed or initialed, or performing any other functions that would normally fall under the duties of general stage manager or a company stage manager. You should not be signing the closing notice or individual notices of actors upon termination of contract. You should not be doing payroll or distributing payments. That also includes salaries and per diems. You should not be doing building maintenance, janitorial or custodial or house management work, which includes securing and locking the theater following performances or rehearsals. And it should not be a condition of your employment as a stage manager or assistant stage manager to own a motor vehicle. And that comes all from the LORT contract, but most of that is pretty much the same contract to contract. So recognize that those are the things you should not be doing. If they're asking you to do some of those duties, you should be asking for further compensation. If you are an equity stage manager, and you'd have to search it, but it is on the unofficial equity stage managers Facebook page. There is a Google Doc of extra duties that people have filled in. I think it's mostly here in New York, but I think there are also people from other areas across the country. What theaters they've worked for and what extra duties they have performed and what they've gotten compensated for. I have used that Google spreadsheet as a basis to go to producers and say, this is what you're asking me to do that's an extra duty. Here's the average of what other people get for that. Here's what I would like to request based on the circumstances for this show. You might want to ask if, for example, you're running a light board for a little less money, if it's not a lot of cues, if it's a very complex show lighting wise, you might want to ask for more. So again, you've got some leeway to play with. There are other things you might be asked to do as well. For example, preparing a separate prompt book for publication or archival purposes. If it's a second one in addition to the one you've already done for the show, you would be required to be paid extra for that. Under LORC contract, for example, that would be $350. Another thing you might be asked to do is a fight captain. That varies depending on contract. Under LORC contract, you should be paid no less than $50 extra per week. But under off-Broadway contract, it's 10% of your weekly salary. So if your weekly salary were, for example, $650, you should be paid $65 extra if you were the fight captain. So those are some examples of what equity looks at in terms of what a stage manager can and cannot do and what is considered an extra duty. So I'm going to pass it along to Lizzie, who's going to talk a little bit about her perspective of contracts as a stage manager from a non-union standpoint.
Thanks, Lisa. And I do want to repeat that I'm talking about it as a non-union artist, as everything Lisa just went over and Taylor and Ingrid will talk about. There are very specific rules that come with all unions. So I just want that to be very, very clear. As a non-union artist, I have written my own contract because sometimes, yes, a verbal contract, an email is binding in the state of New York. In other states, that can be binding as well. I know California is one of those states. I like to have it in writing, make sure I know the dates, the title of the project, my duties, everything in there. Contracts also don't have to be 10 pages. A lot of times when you see contracts, it's just like legal jargon people are pulling from Google. They don't understand what it's saying. I once worked with someone that almost signed a contract that said he was going to be paying $40,000 in liability insurance, in which I said to him, you don't have to be an attorney to understand you're not signing this. That is ridiculous to pay that much money in liability insurance. So read it carefully. If you are making, if it's a contract they're sending you, make sure everything is no typos, makes sense. If you are writing it out, even if it's just 3 sentences, if that's all you need to say, this is what I'm doing for this project event, fine. Just make sure it's very clear and understood. You don't have to try to sound like an attorney. Oh, I just lost my train of thought, but I will refer to my notes. When you are writing a contract, if you're reading a contract, excuse me, that a company has sent you, a project has sent you that you're not 100% sure, ask a colleague, ask a friend, ask one of your parents, ask a sibling, ask a partner. My father is an attorney, so any contract I do get, even if I fully understand what I'm reading, or if it's one I'm reading, I always have him look at it, because, you know, I'm very fortunate that I am that close with someone who's an attorney. Not everyone has that luxury, but ask another stage manager, ask if you're a set designer, ask another set designer. It's very important because as a young artist starting out in New York, I signed a PA contract where nowhere in my contract did it say, you're going to have to do laundry and wardrobe once tech starts. Surprise, surprise, tech started and they handed me all that. I did it. It was good to be able to learn those skills and help with that on that show. But I wish I had been told prior, because I would have charged more money. So I learned a lot from working on that project. But, you know, and a lot of these are questions I knew after that project to ask in interviews. So whether your interview is on the phone or in person or in this day and age, Zoom, right? Ask. Have a list of questions. Asking questions is a good thing and it's not a bad thing. So if anyone ever tells you that, they're wrong. Ask as many questions as you want. It's only going to make you a stronger professional and a stronger artist. Something you should also have specified in your contract if you're running the boards. I have said this before, I personally like running the boards, but if I am running the boards, whether it's all video, lights and sound, or just one of the 3 or 2, I specify exactly which ones I'm doing from start to end and how much I need to be compensated. I also will rewrite my contract or add an additional note if there's overtime, if the show extends. I keep a list and I keep every single email, every single text, paper trail, have it all printed out and from start to end. It is very important to make sure you have that. What else do I have on here? Make sure that their signature seems legit. Just make sure. I know people that have read contracts and something can seem off. It wasn't their signature, it wasn't the right producer's signature. Maybe the company had a typo in its name. Just read very, very, very clearly before entering a process. And when it comes to festivals, showcases, they might not be able to move the needle regarding money. Usually there's like a set stipend. That's something you're going to have to take into account if it's best for you in your life at that moment. If you can do a showcase for $500 and not have to worry about that other finances, or you have savings, or you have a day job, take it. But also, if it is a showcase or another project, feel confident negotiating. So 3 big takeaways: communication, confidence, and psychology. Talk to them, ask if they can. Know what you're worth. I mean, there are many times I don't do them as much anymore, showcases, but when I did, I'd say, is this really all you can give me? Because this is what I'm going to be doing. And sometimes they'll say, you know what, we can do this. And you make the decision. But it's also good to, if you can't do it for that money, or if it's not the right time in your career to be working on that project, just politely decline and keep it simple. If it's over email or text, I can't, over the phone, try to keep it short and simple too. But hi, thank you so much for the opportunity. I currently can't come on this project, and if you want to work with them, I wish you the best with the project and look forward to working in the future. And if you don't want to work with them again, I wish you the best with the project. That, just keep it simple. No one wants to read a play in an email, because I have gotten those emails and it just drives me crazy. I don't need to know 100 reasons for why I don't need to do this project. I just need to figure out someone else to do it. And just how you conduct yourself from beginning to end. Make sure that, at the end of the day, don't forget this is a professional industry. Yes, we have fun. Yes, we get to do something unique. We're not sitting behind a desk all day, right? But we're still professionals. We still are working in an industry, running business, running someone else's business sometimes. So just be very careful about what you say, what you post on social media, how you conduct yourself. Excuse me. And just be confident speaking up, especially if you are in a leadership position. If you're the project manager, the production stage manager, or production manager, feel confident, use your voice, speak up. Don't be brash, but just stay calm and don't talk down to people, and just understand each project is different and what you're getting yourself into, and do the research. Just do as much research as you can. That's a very important part of what we do. So I'm now going to turn it to Taylor to talk a little more about this.
Yeah, kind of what Lizzie and Lisa were both saying. There's, the bottom line is that the company is going to get what they pay for. If you're only giving me a couple bucks, you're throwing me a couple bucks, well, I'm only going to give you a couple bucks worth of my time, usually. But if you're willing to work with me, then I can do that too. It's been a minute since I've negotiated a contract. I'm not going to lie about that. But when I did, and I was doing a lot of showcases and/or festivals where they give you the travel stipend, because that's what they like to call it. I negotiated, and it depended on the company, but I would negotiate generally half upfront, because there has to be some kind of money to start the show. So there's something in their pocket. They're not going to tell you that. They shouldn't. It's not. But yeah, I would negotiate half up front, and generally they were okay with that. And then I got the back half towards the end of the show. And then anything else, if they were waiting for ticket sales to come in and they were throwing you stuff from that, it was gravy, is what they basically considered it. I and like Lizzie was saying, you know, you put down in your contract when you're able to write your own, because sometimes you'll do industrials. It's not just a non-union thing necessarily. If you're doing something else that is not a theater, an equity theater show, you still need a contract for that. So if you're writing your own, yeah, make sure you have what your expected duties are in them, the dates of those shows, for lack of a better term, and your rate per duty and overall, at least that. And that can be a handwritten thing where somebody, as long as your signature is on it and the date, and the producer, their signature and the date is on it as well, that's legally binding. Like Lizzie was saying, she had something thrown at her, you know, partway through her rehearsal where you didn't know about it ahead of time, and it wasn't part of the negotiation initially. Well, if you have that contract written up, typed up, hopefully, because it looks a little bit nicer, you go back to that contract. You say, you know, under the circumstances, I would say, all right, if you want to throw the light board at me, let's say, and you didn't tell me that beforehand, well, we got to go back to what my contract had said before, and we have to reword that, because you got to add in the pay for now board op, whatever that may be. And then you take that initial contract, you initial what you changed and the date, and then you type it up again, have the producer and yourself sign it, date it, look at it, and that's your new contract. You can add things to an already existing contract. So the contract goes both ways. You've got to make sure that you're abiding by it as well. If there was something that is in your contract that you're not doing, well, they can come at you and say, hey, you agreed to do this and here it is. You got to do it. So it's fair. It's to be fair on both ends. It's funny because like Lisa was talking about specifically the LORT contract, and a lot of those things do carry over. We are considered in equity as stage managers the capital A actors. We don't have our own separate piece in there. So when the conversation of actors, capital A, comes up, we're part of that too. So that's also something to look out for in the language of things. If you see a capital A actor, well, that includes you. There were times where, again, I did the opposite kind of what Lizzie did. You wound up doing the wardrobe thing, right?
Yeah, I did it, and I was also younger, so I didn't really think about negotiating everything, but it worked. I'm glad I did do it because I required all those skills.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like, it doesn't
work out well
to learn a new thing either, but it's be compensated for it.
Yeah, it's nice to be paid for the work you're doing.
Yeah. What happened with me was I was doing it was for Nymph, may it rest, where I was doing a show where I was the ASM at that particular moment. The PSM was sitting next to me, and then the director was on the other side as well. And the producer came in, and I don't even know who asked the question regarding props, but somebody asked, you know, who's getting the props and when are they coming and all that. And he looked at me and said, you are. And I looked back and said, no, I'm not. Because that's not I was the ASM. I'm not the prop designer or ASM/prop designer. And that threw him big time. And the stage manager and director sitting next to me were like, they had like visible question marks above their head geared toward the producer. And he, in a separate conversation with the PSM later, said, well, what did she expect to be doing? And the PSM said, assisting me. And even the director said something like, I don't know why he told you that at all. And I didn't either. And it especially worked out because I wound up being the PSM later on, the original leave. So, and that was, and she actually, in her case, I think she took the pay up to what she had done. whatever the date was, what she felt was fair. And then she gave the rest back. She didn't keep it because she wasn't doing the job anymore. It didn't go to me, but it was something back in their pockets to do, at another date. But yeah, it's just, and also know that, there are hills to die on, and then there are hills to not die on, and you have to choose which ones work for you, because that's what it comes down to. It has to work out for you mostly, because we're not, as stage managers, we don't have anyone representing us. We're representing ourselves. So, we have to make the choices of, all right, well, I'll do that. As long as you compensate me somehow, I'll do that task. And again, Lisa was saying, we're not supposed to be asked to provide our own transportation, our own automobiles. I suppose if you are, again, they're not supposed to, but if you are, I would negotiate gas and wear and tear into that contract somehow, some way. You have to hand over the receipt every time you get a new gas bill or new receipt, but that's perfectly fine. I don't need to hold on to that receipt. And yeah, I think that's about it for me. And again, also we have what are called minimums. The pay that a lot of the time I have seen in advertisements is minimum XYZ. Well, that's a minimum. You can talk to the producer to bump that up a bit. There are guidelines that we have to follow as well, because again, we're a union, so there are certain things that we just don't get as far as that goes. And I would never, especially as an ASM, if I knew what the PSM was being paid, I would never try to negotiate more than that, because that's not fair. I'm not the PSM. As a PSM, however, I would try to bump it up a bit more, because again, it's all they can do is say no, and all you can do is say no if you want to, and you're allowed to. So, and I'm gonna pass it to Ingrid now. She's gonna give you a little bit more on her experience and equity guidelines.
So with the union, again, speaking mostly from the equity member perspective and things with that nature, because I think I've had slightly different experience, especially when it comes to writers with contracts. Things that you expect to happen, but sometimes you don't know exactly that are going to happen on the first day. So I've toured a couple of times. On a situation that the stage manager essentially is the only administrative or technical person out on the road with the company that is working on that show. Sometimes we'll have technical help if we go to large venues, which is always appreciated, but maintaining the show like day to day, if we're not in the city, falls on the stage manager. So plus there's a lot of administrative that a stage manager does there as well. So because it's such long running, there was actually a writer that stage managers in that company signed earlier, starting at contract signing, than most I've hardly ever see this come up. A traditional thing in union contracts, almost across the board, not talking about codes because that's a different story, but union agreement is a 2-week out. So you or the company can give 2 weeks notice to the other party and then leave the contract. Before that, it is called a buyout. So if you leave early, you may have to pay back because, of course, you're leaving them in the lurch. If they just dismiss you early, they have to pay you 2 weeks. For this particular company, because of how difficult it can be with the stage manager and their essential functions, instead of a 2-week out, the stage manager, and only the stage manager, because the actors had 2 weeks, the stage manager had a 4-week out. So for us to leave, we have to give notice 4 weeks ahead of leaving, which also helps. And on the reverse side, the producer had to let us know 4 weeks ahead of the final performance, because we had a date when our contract was going to end, but sometimes it could end early. So they had to let the entire company of that show know 4 weeks ahead of time because it was under the stage manager's notice. So that's something you don't always think about that could be negotiated. With that, giving a 4 week notice versus a 2 weeks notice, I got a pay bump over the minimum there. So I think it was like a 5% pay increase on my weekly salary because of that, which was helpful. And it's something that they automatically have in there. Didn't I probably could have negotiated it, but a 5% increase over the life of the contract actually was pretty good. So right there already, there was something that made it above minimum. Additionally, with that company, because they expected overtime, we stage managers had guaranteed overtime every single week of two different varieties. And if your company had to happen to exceed that amount of overtime, then we saw it. But otherwise, it was already in there. So my minimum on those contracts was already higher. Another thing that would show up that you wouldn't sign immediately, but could be assigned once it's determined for that particular company, again, because there's no technical portion on the road, laundry. And then the actors were also actor ASMs, which meant they were allowed to, they knew that they would be responsible for loading in and out. However, um, with the decision of the stage manager, of course, talking with the ASMs, we picked who would be our first and second ASM, which they also got a weekly pay bump. So that was another rider that they signed after the contract started, but once they were determined. Something that's more common with this in most union theaters would be generally the fight captain. And if for some reason the dance captain is decided later, because that, as Taylor mentioned, is an additional, or Lisa mentioned, as an additional on top of your normal responsibilities, you get more money. So once that's determined, you sign that part, possibly negotiation involved in there as well, and then it becomes part of your contract. Um, Using those guidelines, I suppose that you once you find out that something is becoming your duty, or it becomes necessary for maybe someone on the stage management staff to do it, then you can negotiate as well, instead of, if it wasn't found out during the interview process, negotiate it, get the rider, sign it, and then not only make sure you have a copy for your own records, the producer has a copy, but get that rider to equity as well. An important thing with equity contracts is that they are actually done in quadruplicate, so there are 4 copies that should be signed. Sometimes you can do a digital one and print out the copies. Try to make sure that the producer signs first, all the time, if not signing concurrently. Sometimes it's done with carbon paper, but with that, a lot of times I know producers will be nice and will be like, oh, we'll send you a copy when we send ours. I've been burned by that. Send it, make sure you get it, you track it yourself. So the same with any sort of additional writers. I know also on that tour, again, wardrobe, we had an additional weekly payment that was not taxed, so it was outside of the paycheck, um, for doing laundry each week. If it was one person, they would get the entire amount per week. If it was two, they split it. We also, because we were on tour, there was the driving rider, which was determined once people decide who didn't want to drive, and you could get a trial period. A lot of times they prefer that the stage manager be a driver, but it's not necessarily required. I do know of one particular stage manager who had a physical health reason why they couldn't. So they were like, you can't be forced into doing that, just like you can't be forced into agreeing to or signing any of these riders. So there is that aspect. I would say also with union agreements, understand that that is the entire rule book or agreement book is your entire contract. You can negotiate anything as long as it does not detract from the rules already written. So you can get extra protections, extra pay, whatever. You can negotiate it for it, but you cannot negotiate down those um, rules and the terms of that agreement. I personally have not negotiated for more pay myself. I try the times I have, it's been more of a negotiation for other aspects. Um, Housing, because I've done a lot of regional contracts where the quality of the housing is immensely important to what you do. Um, for them, I'm pretty sure almost every single union contract, if you are working more than 50 miles from your home base, they have to provide housing. Um, so I've had one time when the producer was like, and the production manager called me to make sure, it's like, it's right on the line. It's not over 50 miles. Are you okay with this? Um, just to make sure I was completely aware that that was not a thing they were required to provide. They ended up providing travel, like covering the travel to the theater, but they were not required to provide housing. Another company I worked with for multiple seasons, the first time housing wasn't great. It was okay, but it wasn't great. So I kind of made the producer aware of my feelings at the end of the first contract, got asked back to do another one, and because of that, my housing the next 2 years was one of the best it could be. Um, with that, also along those lines, was transportation to and from the theater, because there are, if you're being housed and you're outside of a certain distance, like walking distance of the theater, I think it might be a quarter mile. They do have to provide transportation, whether that's someone driving or the rental of a rental car. So I know with several theaters they would do that. I personally choose to bring my own vehicle. I did not negotiate for gas. That's something I'm going to think about next time. But they did have to provide an insured vehicle for that travel so that the actors or stage managers, because capital A actor, can get to where they need to go. Um, yeah, those are my thoughts of that issue. Oh, other things to probably negotiate about. Partners in housing, if you want, because sometimes they don't have, there are conditions with that. Transportation accommodations to and from. I've heard things about having pets with you, could talk about that. Um, Comp tickets, things of that nature. Even just the right to choose your stage management team. Because while in pretty much every contract, as the PSM, you should be consulted, that doesn't always mean you have full say on who it is. I think I've been lucky the past few times when I've been at PSM that I've been allowed to have a good say on it. Sometimes I don't have an ASM that I can think of or who's available at the time, but sometimes that's worked out in my favor. So there's that.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in on what Ingrid was just saying. I think in this post-COVID world, and you're probably reading a lot of the same articles we're reading, is that theaters have been closed for a long period of time. There's no money coming in for them. When we start opening up, it's going to be a slow process. The pay is not going to be necessarily what it was. We're all going to have to make sacrifices. I could go on. And I think some of these extra perks, as Ingrid was saying, considering maybe if I'm bringing my own car and I'm driving more than a quarter of a mile from housing to the rehearsal space or to the theater for performance, speaking up and saying, can you add this for me? Or making the housing a little nicer, or providing things like that that wouldn't necessarily be part of your weekly salary, which may go down compared to what it was pre-COVID, but you can gain some of that back in perks to be able to help yourself out in this post-COVID world as we start to go back, so that you're not looking at a new equity minimum perhaps, or a stipend that is lower than what you feel comfortable with, but you need the job because there are few out there. And I do think that is going to be the case as we slowly ease back in. There are going to be a lot of us competing for jobs, whether it be non-union or union. And we're going to have to decide personally what works for us in our environment and what are those extras that we can negotiate and get that will ease the burden a little bit.
Yeah, and there were also instances where I didn't have to negotiate things. It was just already their standard where, again, there were extra riders that I had to sign because for a particular show that I had done, I had to be on stage. I guess it would have been considered an actor ASM, where I had to be on stage at the top of the show and actually participating in a scene. And I had the option, so that was already in the interview. They were like, we know we already have to pay you for that. That was already, it was a given. The option that I did have a little bit later on, which was not decided until I was about to start with them, was that I could either provide my own costume and they would rent it from me, or I could buy the costume and be reimbursed for it. And I chose to have it rented from me because I already owned most of the pieces I needed. It was jeans and a t-shirt and sneakers. I already had the jeans and the sneakers they wanted, and I bought a couple of cheap t-shirts and made back what I paid in, before the course of the contract was over. Because those are the rental amounts are in the whichever contract you're working under. They're not decided arbitrarily as a negotiation thing. So there are those given.
And something I just want to add is, I got stuck with the wardrobe and on that project because they like to take advantage of production assistants. They'll do that. And they'll make, and it turned out to be a good thing, but respect yourself as an artist, not just a person. I mean, if you're, yes, as a intern production assistant, you're gonna have to run errands every once in a while, but it's not in your contract to then fetch someone a coffee if there's a coffee pot in the room. They can get up and make themselves coffee, or get someone a pencil. So feel confident in how you are treated as an artist, whether you're the production assistant or the PSM. If you are the PSM and you see producers or production managers or company managers taking advantage of the PAs like that, say something that makes you look like a more professional and better production stage manager and artist. And when you are negotiating your contracts, don't lowball the person giving it to you. That number they're starting out with it is literally just a starting number. You never know on whether it's a showcase or a longer running contract if they can give you more. Don't be greedy, but say what you're worth. Because that's a part of professionalism. That's a part of how you conduct yourself, and that's very important on any project. Just respect yourself, respect your worth.
Yeah, and most producers are upfront about things, but recognize, and I think we could all attest to this, that at some point in our careers, we have come up against a producer who is not trustworthy. And you need to be able to stand up for not only yourself, but if you are an equity member, for those capital A actors as well as yourself, and say, no, this is not a part of the contract, or what you're trying to do is breaking the contract, and make sure that you are then informing equity if you have to, that is not working. I'm like I said, I'm sure all of us can attest to having a producer that was not forthright or tried to sneak in duties later. And it's okay if a producer tries to come to you later and say, oh, I thought that you understood that you were going to run the light board, and you say, that was never discussed with me. I will be glad to do so. If it's not here, I'll be glad to do so, because I'm like Lizzie. I don't mind running a board. That's not something that is a problem for me, but I'm going to be accurately and fairly compensated for that. So yes, we can have that discussion. It should happen up front, but recognize that sometimes it doesn't, and it is okay. You don't have to sit there and agree to it. It is okay to say, yes, I will be glad to do that. However, there's compensation with that.
Yeah.
And
Or if you're asked in the middle of the rehearsal process to be the fight captain, here it is in the equity contract. This is what you have to pay me to do this per week. I would be glad to do it.
Yeah, there's
and
Mhm.
and when you're going when you know, if there's something you're asked to do throughout the process, I mean, if you can sew and a button breaks and you can quickly do that, yeah, you're not gonna like start charging them for buttons, right? You're just gonna do it, and that's a good thing that you have those skills. Obviously, we want, you know, or if you can just go out and pick up the paint, pick up whatever thing is needed. Yeah, I mean, we're there to support the project. As you know, we're gonna support each other. But no is a full sentence. If there's something you're asked to do, if someone makes you uncomfortable at pre-production, during, post, speak up. You don't be taken advantage of in any way, shape, or form. No one is better than anyone else, regardless of what they're being paid. We're all artists and we're all human. And, you know, also feel confident. I mean, I said it's before, feel confident saying no to jobs, but what I also mean is like, you don't need to take every single job. And we're going to talk about this more next week, self-care. I don't want to work with a workaholic. When I'm interviewing people, when I'm having meetings, if all you can talk about are your projects, I I might not necessarily hire you. I want to see that you can do other things, that you are taking care of yourself, that your whole well-being is accounted for. So, you know, yes, we are going to take projects often to work and support ourselves. But if you can take a vacation, or if you just want to stay home, or you know, you want to just go do something that's not related to entertainment at all, that is not a bad thing.
Well, and you're also going to have instances. I had an opportunity last year where someone I had worked with previously was approached, who had seen a show I was stage managing, and they approached the artistic director I was working for and said, "Oh, can you introduce me to your stage manager? I would like to hire them for a project." And he said, "Well, yes, I'll be glad to." And he introduced us. And when after that introduction, when he and I were by ourselves, he looked at me and he's like, "They can't afford you. I introduced you because that was the polite thing to do. So if you get contacted by that," he's like, I know they can't afford you."
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And I did get an email. "Would love to have you for this project. Here's what we're paying." And I immediately emailed back and said, "Is there room in the budget for that amount to grow? I that cannot do it for that amount." And they came back and said no. And I said, "I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you. I wish you luck with your project."
Yeah.
Fun.
It happens.
And
And it's okay to say no.
there have certainly been times where I have said no to things that I for one reason or another wasn't able to do. And or if someone has contacted me and I already know I don't want to work with them, I will usually, you know, kindly say no, but I can give you other people's information, and I will contact those other people before because I'll ask permission first if I'm going to do it. And I will contact those other people and say, you know, can I give you this person's email address? Will you you know, but maybe don't look too closely into it. Give them a fair warning, the people who you are, and I've done that a couple of times.
Yeah.
But in regards to negotiating salary stuff overall, you know, it's, who was it? Norman Vincent Peale said, "Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you may land among the stars." Give them your dream number. Because like Lizzie said, you know, you don't want to lowball, because odds are the price that they are posting on the ad is the lowball number to you. To me, it most of the time has been. And you don't want to scare them with your price, because you can't be completely out of the ballpark, because they'll never ask you back otherwise. But yeah, you know, take a shot.
Don't be cocky, but be confident. There's,
Yeah.
you know, and
Negotiations are a two-party thing. It's not just you. So, you know, they have to go back and forth. That's what negotiation is. It drives me nuts when people just stop. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it.
Well, and going back to what Lizzie said about research, you know, if you're being asked to do, a show, then you should, research it. What is involved? How difficult is this show going to be? I am currently and working, where of course it paused, um, working on a reading of a new musical. That's very different, and what is being asked of me stage managing a new musical is different from what a play would be. So my rate for doing a musical is going to be higher with more requirements and things that need to be done than it would be for a play. So knowing that you can have different things, that you can play with whatever that amount, that dream amount is in your head, depending on what those responsibilities are. And the others may disagree with me, but I think there are times, and probably that touches on self-care, where you may want to take a project that when you look at that initial number or those initial duties that you're being asked to do, and those extras is a little lower than what you might feel comfortable with in that moment, but it's something that you feel is going to benefit you. The people you're going to work with are going to help advance your career. Or it may be a group of people that you've worked with before and you love working with, and you know, for X amount of time, I'm going to have a joyful experience and I need that right now.
Yeah, pleasure projects.
Yeah.
We all have to have those. It's not, if you can financially take those on, yes. I mean, sometimes you have to say no, but pleasure projects are very important.
Yeah.
I think we should open it up for questions and comments as well, in the last little bit that we've got here. So if you guys have any questions or comments that you'd like to ask and or give us, let us know now. Either in the chat, or you can open up your cameras and your microphones and speak your piece.
And I will say the last passion project I worked on was going to be a showcase that eventually became an off-Broadway mini contract. So you just never know.
Yeah, never. It's the beauty of the business.
I'm always on mute. Yeah, I've done a couple like one or a couple day readings. It's like, oh, I like that director. Oh, okay,
I
cool.
love ratings.
Yeah.
I miss, that's what I miss the most of in-person theater. I really miss ratings. They've always been my they're just, they're.
Alexa, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, hi. I do have a question.
Mhm.
So I'm relatively brand new to this whole thing. I'm a non-union stage manager. I work at furloughed, but I work at the Disneyland Resort as a stage manager for shows that don't have stages. So a lot of what I do is more event looking stuff because I don't have an actual stage to manage. I deal with crazy people running at performers, or like just people with strollers not paying attention. So like that's kind of more what I think about during this. And so I'm hoping to go into more traditional theater once this is all over. And so because I'm new, I guess I just am curious about what you guys have experienced when you were new, and do you negotiate every contract that you get? And you talked about all the different ways to balance financial things that you can do, and how much you're willing to be taken advantage of versus not. So I guess my question is about being a new person. Where do you draw the line, or what are some experiences that you've had that were maybe negative or not?
Well, I'm never okay with being taken advantage.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's never okay to take advantage. And if you feel that way, either say something or don't work on the project.
Yeah, it's okay to leave.
Yeah, no is a full sentence.
I grew up very much of, and my parents are, my mom's an interior designer, my dad is a computer programmer and such, and so they were working on projects and whatnot, and I was taught from a very young age where if you're starting to get frustrated with something, walk away from it for a little bit. Do something else, watch, listen to music, watch television, read a book, just walk away from it for a little bit and then come back to it refreshed. You can't always do that on the job. I understand that. That being said, if you got to go into a bathroom and scream, do it. Or something. Because
I've cried.
Yeah, there have been people who
cried in a bathroom.
Same.
Only once, but it has happened.
Yeah, no, there was I got snapped at for no reason one time, and I stopped doing and walked away
Same.
bathroom and just like let my frustrations out. But no, it's not, taking advantage is never okay. That's the time to go. And that's where yes, again, we're team players to a point. You cannot be a team player to a fault. Because they will start taking advantage of you. They'll start asking more of you, like, hey, can you go pick up the thing down the street for us real quick? It's on your way. When that starts happening over and over again, that's no longer a favor. That's a
Taking.
accountability.
And I do negotiate all of my contracts. I mean, yes, there have been times a colleague or friend who I've worked with several times has texted me, hey, I have a day project. It's this much. Can you do it? I'm not necessarily, if it sounds like it's good money per hour and it's not, all day and it's a few hours and it sounds like a project. Yeah, I mean, sometimes if one of these guys just texted me something like that, obviously I just go do it. But you just have to know and trust your gut, and it's just a balance. And it's just as you work more and on different parts of the business you work on, it just gets easier navigating that. But for longer projects in productions, I do negotiate every single contract. Day things, you just kind of have to know and trust your gut and feel it out. And you know the people, if you know the person you're working with, they're not going to take advantage of you. If it's new people, ask the questions and be confident and trust your gut. A lot of it is just trusting your gut.
Yeah, and Alexa, I would speak to what you do is a unique thing right now. So I would take advantage of this time where you're not working at Disneyland to kind of sit down and go over what are the things that you do at Disneyland. You talked about watching out for people with strollers who are not paying attention and watching out for people coming up too close to the performers. Some of those skills can be very beneficial to you as you start to move into traditional theater, so to speak. I come from an educational background, so yeah, I can. I've worked with children. I've been a teacher. I've managed large groups of people. Those are skills that are unique to what you do now, that you can present to a prospective employer that may help you negotiate a little bit more as you are learning and working your way up in the process. So think about those skills, that you use at Disneyland, and what are those things that you can that are unique to you or unique to what you do that you can then use as a
I've
stage
never
manager.
I've never worked at a park like that before. So, it's very interesting, and there's definitely crossover, and
Yeah.
just be confident and know you can bring something different to the table.
I think I can address this in a couple of different ways. So yeah, listen to things like this. People talk about their experience of what to ask about before you go in. When you're in it, after the contract is already signed and executed, um, try to find out or determine with your judgment, like, is it a company thing? Or is there someone you can go to also advocate for you? Because that's something I'm learning. Like, sometimes it is a person and there's someone else you can go to remedy the situation. Um, I've I've interned a couple of times, like before I became union. One of the times there was a lot going on, and I needed to go to people above me to like, hey, I need help with this, or there was a particular relationship that wasn't great in terms of it was taking advantage of me based on that relationship, but they didn't mean negatively. It just was not great. So it's going to the leadership and seeing what can be done. Actually, the next contract after that, a situation happened financially where they had to cut the first week of rehearsal for those not on a union contract. I, at that time, was still non union. My travel plans, however, were going to put me there, like housing wise, I had to be there that week it was cut. I wasn't in rehearsal. Like, you're not paying me, you're housing me, but you're not paying me. I'm not going to be there, like, after that first situation. Um, it ended up being a kind of polarizing thing with some of the members of the administration and the production team, and I'm still kind of dealing with that. but it's like, I'm not gonna be there in this situation if you're not paying me. I'm not letting you take advantage of me like that. So there is that as well. Also, parks are fun. Been there, done that. Did a magic show, did a drum show. We kind of had a stage, but it wasn't like the theater building. It was like an outdoor stage where people could get really close. So I feel you with those patrons
Yeah.
and the guests. It's interesting, like trying to get their attention and be like, don't touch the performers and don't try to touch the rat, please.
Uh-oh.
The magic show had a rat.
No, yeah, I figured that's what you were
Yeah.
referring to.
But
Don't let
yeah.
people undermine your intelligence.
Yeah,
You
and
know you're an intelligent person. Don't let them take advantage of it.
I'm dealing with the outside stage now and dealing with repercussions from it now also because now other shows are getting canceled. Yeah, I had a patron come up to me the other day as I was changing over between bands and say, "Hey, can you hurry this along? We're getting hot in our cars," because they're now not allowed to leave their cars during this during the concert, and it was a Grateful Dead day, as you can imagine how great that smelled. But yeah, they were not allowed to just be outside of their cars unless it was to go to the bathroom. And my response to him was, and again, I'm a bit farther along in my career than I'm not new. So I turned and said, well, the set's going to start when it starts because they have a specific time where they're supposed to start, and they are allowed to do a little bit of a quick sound check beforehand. My literal answer was the set's going to start when it starts. And
Yeah. A Grateful Dead concert in August. Oy vey.
3 bands. 3
Bad.
bands.
Yeah.
4 hours in the middle of the afternoon.
But you got paid, right?
I got paid.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But now, yeah, anyway, we'll talk about it later. But yeah, no, and I also learned on my first contract that there's a specific director that I never want to work with again. I won't say who it is.
We've all been there.
Still working at the school, but I don't have any desire to ever work with him again, ever, because I was constantly calling my rep for that. And again, and I know you're not union right now, is it say that? So, but at Disney, you still have a boss. You have, who is not the mouse, I know that. You have a boss that you can go to. Find out who your higher ups are, because there has to be somebody. And you not, but go to that person. Ask them questions. I'm not too sure about. You have a gut reaction for a reason. If it's something you're not okay with or doesn't seem quite right, odds are it's not. And mention it to them. See what their take on it is, and if the situation ever comes up again, use what you learned. That's what we're all doing, and if I've said before, if you're not learning something new, you're doing it wrong.
And also, as a non-union professional myself, you can always call what your union would be, whether it's Actors Equity or SDC, and ask them questions if something's going on, and they can try to help you as much as they can. They're never going to turn you away. They can't necessarily help you with every single thing, but they can. If you feel there's something wrong, you can call and ask. So don't ever, as a stage manager, don't ever hesitate to call AAA if you have a question.
Yeah, I did a lot that first contract. And since then, not as much since then, but yeah. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, self-care definitely taking place next week, so we can get more into that, like managing while you're on the job.
Self-care is so important.
Yeah.
Oh, got so much on that.
Between jobs now.
Self-care. Anyway.
I hope I answered your question.
Thanks, Alexa.
But yeah, if there's nothing else, I think we're gonna wrap it up.
Yeah, and I will say this though, Alexa, don't be afraid. You're always welcome to contact any of us. But ask people around you. People that have been in the business will be glad to mentor, guide you, answer questions. So never be afraid to ask.
Yeah, there's also the SMA website, like puts people in touch with, and you don't have to be a union member to join there. The only reason I mentioned them specifically is because you don't have to be a union member to join that. And I don't know any others off the top of my head right now.
SMA is great, and it's very cost effective. I'm a member of the SMA, and I'm non-union, and they're great. So check them out.
But yeah, if there's nothing else, we're gonna see you guys next week.
Self-care next week.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.